I'm Jerry Seib with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by Congressman Michael McCaul of Texas, the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, and as a result, somebody who spent more time, as much time as anybody in the country, paying attention to the Boston Marathon bombing. Thanks for joining us
Well,
today.
thanks for having me, Jerry.
We're 1 week away from that dramatic Friday in which there was the chase, the shooting, and then ultimately the arrest. How confident are you now that we know the story of the Boston Marathon bombing?
Well, I think certainly the FBI, Joint Terrorism Task Force, Boston Police did a fantastic job taking these two off the streets. But in some ways, the FBI's investigation has really just begun. There are so many unanswered questions, particularly with respect to his trip to Russia and the Chechen region. I know the FBI is reviewing his computers that he had in his apartment. They have sent a U.S. team overseas to the Chechen region to interview people. So I find it a bit astounding that people right out of the box are saying there's no foreign connection whatsoever, when the fact is the FBI has just begun their investigation. So as a former federal prosecutor, I reserve judgment until all the evidence is in, and quite frankly, all the evidence is not in. But one thing is certain, whether it was foreign-driven or homegrown, is that this was foreign-inspired. When you look at the YouTube website that the older brother put up after he came back from the Chechen region, which is a very dangerous part of the world, it's filled with jihadist websites, very violent websites. And so something happened to him. He radicalized. We just don't know when and where.
You're assuming the older brother is the driving force here, that's the picture that emerges.
It appears that way, just like any older brother is, you know. And the older brother is the one who made the travels. And, you know, our assessment, and it's early on, but the level of sophistication of these devices, many of which we've seen in Pakistan and Afghanistan, the way they've handled them so professionally, leads a lot of us to believe that there was some sort of training done by others. And one unanswered question is, are those trainers overseas in the Chechen region, or are they in the United States?
And the key to that question may very well be this 6-month trip to Russia and the Chechnya region.
I think so. We had signs that he was starting to radicalize as early as 2009, 10. He's interviewed by the FBI in 2011 for a very short period of time. They had a lead on him. They closed the lead in June of 2011. And remember, this whole FBI lead was triggered by the Russian intelligence service communique saying that he was extreme and that he was going to travel outside the United States to join underground extremist groups. So that raises some issues. Once that was closed, the FBI considered that a closed case and they didn't revisit it.
There's been some criticism of the FBI's handling of that particular part of this story. Are you comfortable with the way the FBI conducted itself before we got to this point?
Well, again, I think there are questions from what the FBI told me is a full and thorough investigation, and I don't like to second guess them. I give them the benefit of the doubt, but the fact is that their flag in the tide system did not go up because they had the Russian spelling, which was incorrect and the wrong date of birth. On the other hand, the Department of Homeland Security's flag did go up. So Secretary Napolitano states, yeah, we knew he left for Russia, while the FBI is telling us that they had no idea that he ever went to Russia. So what happened there? What breakdown occurred? I mean, this post 9/11 world where connecting the dots is what the message was. That's the whole basis for creating the Department of Homeland Security, and yet we still are not doing that. And so the question is, did the DHS, the person on the JTTF, the task force, share that with the FBI agent?
And that's just not clear yet?
It's unclear.
How much information has been gotten from the younger brother?
Well, as of today, we get some very significant information. As we suspected, when the arrests were made and the search warrants were executed, we found at least 7 of these IED devices, which led a lot of us to believe that there was going to be a second wave of attacks. They stayed in the Boston area, and now we've had indications that the younger brother has now given information that, yes, they were planning a second wave of attacks in New York, possibly at Times Square.
Let's step back from this in your role as somebody who has to think about Homeland Security on a broad scale. what are we learning here about what we do well and what we don't yet do as well as we might?
Well, again, these travel flags and information sharing, vitally important, because I would argue if the FBI knew that he left the country to go back over there, they may have reopened the lead. And remember, when he comes back from Russia, he's so radicalized, and then 9 months later pulls off the largest attack since 9/11. So Al-Qaeda has evolved. They're becoming more franchised. Remember, the command and control structure of bin Laden is no longer really there. We've taken out a lot of high-value targets through drones and other measures, special forces. So now they're very decentralized. And what they would like to do is grab out to a U.S. resident or citizen, radicalize them while they're in the U.S., train them, and then let them conduct these terrorist plots. That's going to be the new face of Al-Qaeda, and a new threat that, quite frankly, is harder to detect than, I would argue, than the actual hijackers 9/11, because there you had a bigger cell to penetrate, and the foreign travel. In this case, whether it's homegrown or foreign-driven, but a smaller cell, if you will, is very, very difficult to penetrate and very difficult to stop.
You know, it does raise the broader question also of how much extremism in place, which I guess is the term we're all starting to use now, how much of that do you suspect is going on in the country now, detected or undetected?
I think there's quite a bit, and I think we point out 5 cases, many in the United States, when we sent our letter to the Secretary Napolitano, FBI Director, and Clapper, the D&I Director, 5 individuals who were on the FBI's radar screen and CIA and somehow went on to perpetrate terrorist plots like Hassan and al-Awlaki are two of the biggest ones. And so one issue is how much can we monitor these websites? The radical jihadist or the people subscribing to Inspire. It is in the public domain, and I think if we could monitor those a little more closely, we may have a better idea of who is radicalizing within the United States.
And do you bump up against civil liberties questions when you go down that path? And that's been the tension for a decade now, since 9/11, on some of these questions.
And of course, and I think there's always a balance of security versus privacy and civil liberties. These websites are in the public domain, so there are no real privacy issues there. But again, the more we look into this case, the more unanswered questions there are, more concern I have. And one thing I try to educate the American people on is the Chechen region itself.
Yeah.
Most people don't know where Chechnya is on the map. They don't know who the Chechen rebels are. There is a close affiliation between the Chechen rebels and Al-Qaeda. Bin Laden started this. That we found them in Pakistan, Afghanistan. They killed a constituent's son of mine. 9 Chechen rebels killed him in Iraq. And so the affiliation's there. So when you have someone like this individual who is radicalizing, going to that dangerous part of the world, that really should have raised a lot of flags.
Yeah, and in the future presumably will.
I sure hope so.
Let me ask you this final question, and this is inevitably going to come up, bumping up into another big issue that's afoot here in Congress, which is immigration reform. As you think about the questions that you've been discussing the last few minutes, should this affect the immigration debate? Or does the idea of reforming the immigration system actually provide benefits to a Homeland Security perspective on immigration?
I think what you're going to see, and you can't take the politics out of this, is forces on both sides using the Boston bombing as a justification for what they're trying to achieve. So, for instance, I think the reformers are going to say, look, this is why we need immigration reform. We got a broken system. We need to know who's coming in here legally to work, or who's coming in to work and who's coming in for other reasons.
And we have people in the shadows right now.
We have all these people in the shadows. This will identify them,
Yeah.
so we'll know who these people are. Fairly, legitimate argument. And then you'll also have those who are very much against immigration reform, saying this is the last. This is certainly an example of why we shouldn't be relaxing our immigration laws. Now, my job as chairman of Homeland Security first is to review what happened in Boston, see what, if any, mistakes were made, and correct that to protect American lives. I also have a job we're going to introduce, and we'll pass out a committee, the border security bill, which really goes kind of hand in glove with the reform piece. Members of Congress will not be willing to support immigration reform without that operational control. And I think in light of the bombings, even more justification why we need that operational control. We don't want to repeat the mistakes of 1986, where we granted amnesty and let the security piece fall by the wayside.
Well, Congressman McCaul, big questions. They're going to be with us for a while. Thanks for taking some time to talk. Hope we get a chance to do it again.
Thanks, Jerry.
Okay, good to see you. I'm Jerry Seib with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by Congressman McCaul of Texas, the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, and as a result, somebody who spent more time, as much time in
the Chechen region to interview people. So I find it a bit astounding that people right out of the box are saying there's no foreign connection whatsoever, when the fact is the FBI has just begun their investigation. So, as a former federal prosecutor, I reserve judgment until all the evidence, particularly with respect to his trip to Russia and the Chechen region. I know the FBI is reviewing his computers that he had in his apartment. They have sent a U.S. team overseas to the... Well, I think certainly the FBI, Joint Terrorism Task Force, Boston Police did a fantastic job taking these two off the streets. But in some ways, the FBI's investigation has really just begun. There are so many unanswered questions.
Is anybody in the country paying attention to the Boston Marathon bombing? Thanks for joining us
today.
Thanks
for having me, Jerry.
We're 1 week away from that dramatic Friday in which there was the chase, the shooting, and then ultimately the arrest. How confident are you now that we know the story of the Boston Marathon bombing?